Okay, I want you to picture a number, and it's a really, really big number. $45 billion.
That is just, it's a staggering amount of money.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to even visualize what that looks like.
It is. I mean, you're talking about the GDP of, a small country.
Yeah.
Or the market cap of a company that's been around for a century.
It's a huge industrial giant, yeah.
Exactly. And now imagine that number, $45 billion, just disappearing.
Poof.
Gone. And I'm not talking about over a year, like a slow motion recession, not a decade of bad business, like a blockbuster video situation.
No, this was a cliff.
One single week, May 2022.
It was a financial bloodbath.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard to overstate the scale of the destruction. It wasn't a market dip. It was an extinction level event for that entire ecosystem.
And right in the middle of this hurricane of money, one guy, a guy who called himself the king of the lunatics.
And maybe more tellingly, a guy who named his own daughter after his invention.
We are, of course, talking about Do Kwon, the South Korean crypto king behind Terraform Labs.
This is one of those stories that it really feels like it should be a movie script.
Yeah.
Like a sequel to The Big Short, but you mix in some Catch Me If You Can.
Right.
But it's painfully real for thousands and thousands of people who lost everything. So today, we're going to be unpacking the rise and fall of Kwon Do-hyun, or, as we all know him, Do Kwon.
And what a ride it is, because we're not just looking at a stock chart going down. That's the boring part, almost. The real story here involves, just listen to this list. Algorithmic hubris, a global manhunt with Interpol, fake passports, high-stakes political intrigue in Montenegro.
Of all places.
And it all ends with the 15-year prison sentence that was handed down in late 2025.
Exactly. The headline is the crash, right? That's what everyone remembers.
Yeah.
But the real story is the man, the code, and this pattern of behavior that led us all there.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We really want to get past the headlines, past the panic of the crash itself, and try to understand the psychology here.
The why.
Yeah, the why. And we're going to trace the red flags because, and this is a bit of a spoiler alert, they started way, way before Terra ever launched.
That's such a key point.
Yeah.
Most people start this story in 2018 with Terraform Labs. But you have to go back further. You have to look at the pattern.
And we also want to untangle that crazy legal mess that kept him in limbo in the Balkans for nearly 2 years. It's a fascinating side story in itself.
It really is.
So for this, we're pulling from a pretty massive dossier. We've got legal filings, we have government investigation reports from both South Korea and the U.S., and we have these really detailed chronicles of his movements. Singapore, Serbia, Montenegro. It's all in here. So buckle up.
All right. Let's get into it.
Before we can even touch the billions, we have to go back to the beginning. Because when you look at him on paper, Do Kwon had the kind of resume that, well, it makes venture capitalists just drool. It's the golden resume.
Oh, absolutely. It was perfect. He was born in Seoul in 1991, and his path just seems paved with prestige right from day one. He attended Daewon Foreign Language High School. And
for anyone who doesn't know the Korean education system, that's not just, like, a good school.
No, it's this school. It's incredibly competitive. It produces just a huge chunk of the country's elite.
Yeah.
Getting in there is half the battle.
It's the kind of place that basically guarantees you a spot at a top-tier university, right, if you can make it through.
Exactly, and that's what he did. He took that ticket, and he went straight to the United States. He graduates from Stanford University with a degree in computer science in 2015.
Stanford CS degree. I mean, come on. That's the golden ticket in Silicon Valley.
It is.
You walk into a room with that on your CV, and people they assume you're a genius before you've even said a word.
It just signals everything. It signals competence, it signals network, it signals potential. And he didn't stop there. He did these brief stints as a software engineer at Microsoft and at Apple.
Now, you say brief. We're talking pretty short periods, right? He wasn't like leading the next iPhone design team.
No, not at all. But it doesn't matter. When you put Stanford, Microsoft, and Apple on a slide deck for investors, you're projecting a certain kind of legitimacy.
A stamp of approval. It says, I know what I'm doing. The best companies in the world already vetted me, so you don't have to.
Precisely. It builds this shield against any real scrutiny.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting, and it's part of the story that often just gets glazed over. In 2016, right after this shiny start, he goes back to Korea. And he founds a startup called Anyfi.
NFI, okay. And digging into the research, this is where we see the first, I don't know, the first real cracks in that perfect armor, right? This isn't just a my first startup failed kind of story. There was something sketchier going on.
This is the first major red flag. And frankly, it's one that a lot of people just missed or ignored until it's way too late.
So what was NFI?
It was a startup focused on peer-to-peer Wi-Fi solutions. Kwon was the CEO. And it turns out this company got about $600,000 worth of government funding in its early stages.
Okay, 600 grand. That's not a small chunk of change for a new startup in 2016.
No, it's a serious amount, especially for a first-time founder. But the problem wasn't just the money, it was how they got the money. It involved a massive conflict of interest. The funding was approved through a Korean incubator company. And you'll never guess who was running that incubator.
Let me guess. Based on the theme of this story, one of the co-founders' parents.
You got it. One of the co-founders' parents.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we have nepotism right out of the gate. It's basically my dad's company approved the grant.
It gets worse. Later on, investigations by the Korean Ministry of SMEs and Startups, they dug into this, and they revealed that NFI had actually received failing grades in its initial evaluation reports.
No way.
Yes. So on merit, objectively, the people looking at the business plan said, nope, this does not deserve government funding.
So they flunked the test, but because they knew the principal, they got the scholarship anyway.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
That's essentially what happened. And it wasn't just about getting the money. It was what they did with it. The investigation exposed 5 separate counts of inappropriate use of that funding, specifically for personnel expenses.
Meaning what? They were paying themselves salaries that the grant didn't allow for, or hiring people they shouldn't have.
Correct. The details are a bit murky, but it was clear financial irregularity. Now, to be fair, the ministry reportedly did retrieve the money later on, so there was some accountability, but the pattern was set.
This is the aha moment for me, because long before crypto, long before stablecoins and billions of dollars, we have a documented history here.
Yes.
A history of financial irregularity, of leveraging personal connections to bypass merit, and of misusing funds.
And yet he just pivoted. He moved from that failure, from that scandal, really, straight into the crypto world. And it seems like nobody looked back at NFI.
Well, why would you? You see Stanford, you see Apple. You don't dig into the failed startup from 2 years ago.
Exactly. The golden resume worked. The NFI chapter was just a little footnote that investors probably never even saw.
Which brings us to 2018, the birth of Terraform Labs. He teams up with a guy named Daniel Shin, who was, he was a legitimate heavyweight in Korean e-commerce, a real success story.
Right. And together they have this big idea.
The holy grail of cryptocurrency.
The algorithmic stablecoin.
Let's try to unpack this, because algorithmic stablecoin sounds, terrifyingly complicated. But the core concept, if you strip away the jargon, is actually pretty simple, right?
The goal is simple. The execution is, well, we saw how that went. But the goal is this. In crypto, prices are just too volatile. Bitcoin is a roller coaster.
You can't buy a cup of coffee with it.
Right. Because that coffee might be worth half as much tomorrow, or twice as much. No merchant wants that risk. And you don't want to be the person who spent, what later becomes $10,000 on a pizza.
So you need a stable coin, a coin that's always worth $1.
Exactly. And the normal, boring way to do that is you have a bank account with real dollars in it. For every $1 digital dollar you issue, you have $1 real dollar sitting in a vault somewhere.
That's centralized. It's backed by actual assets.
Correct. That's how coins like USDC or, in theory, Tether are supposed to work. You have to trust a company, trust a bank, trust an audit. But Kwon didn't want to do that. That's too centralized. That's Web 2 thinking.
He wanted to do it with just code.
Just code, a robot central bank. So he created 2 coins, TerraUSD, which was known as UST.
And Luna.
Think of them as being on opposite ends of a seesaw.
Okay, I like that analogy.
UST is the stable coin. Its job is to always be worth exactly $1. Luna is the volatile coin. It's the counterweight. The algorithm links them. So if UST starts trading a little bit high, say at $1.01, because demand is high.
The seesaw is unbalanced.
Right. So the system encourages people to burn Luna to create more UST.
And burning just means destroying the coin, taking it out of circulation.
Exactly. So you destroy some Luna, you mint new UST. That increases the supply of UST, which basic economics brings the price back down to $1.
Simple enough. And what if the price of UST drops? If it's trading at, say, 99 cents?
Then you do the exact opposite. The algorithm encourages you to burn UST to create new Luna. You reduce the supply of UST, which drives the price back up to $1.
So Luna's job is to absorb all the volatility to keep UST stable.
That was the grand design, an elastic monetary policy run by a robot. No banks, no humans, just pure, elegant code.
It sounds like a perpetual motion machine. It sounds beautiful on a whiteboard. But as we know from physics, perpetual motion machines usually have some hidden friction point that brings them to a halt.
The friction point here is confidence. The entire system, that whole beautiful seesaw, relies on Luna having value.
Right.
If people start believing Luna is worth anything, the machine can print all the Luna it wants, but it won't be able to buy back the UST to prop up the price. The seesaw just crashes to the ground.
But for a while, man, did it work, or at least it really looked like it worked.
It worked incredibly well. It boomed. By April 2022, Luna's value had just skyrocketed to over $116 per coin.
From fractions of a cent just a couple years earlier.
It was an unbelievable run. And Kane wasn't just a founder anymore. He was a deity in the crypto space. They built a whole ecosystem around this. You had the Mirror protocol, which let you trade like synthetic versions of stocks like Tesla or Apple on the blockchain.
Which we'll get back to because the SEC had some thoughts on that.
They certainly did. But then there was Anchor. We have to talk about Anchor because this was really the engine of the whole thing. This was the magnet.
Anchor protocol. This was the savings account, right?
It was a savings protocol that offered get this, a 20% annual yield on your UST deposit.
20%. I mean, at the time, your bank was giving you, what, 0.01%?
If you were lucky, it was just irresistible. But you have to ask, where does that 20% come from?
It has to come from somewhere.
It was completely artificial.
Yeah.
There was no real economic activity generating that kind of profit. It was being subsidized by Terraform Labs' own treasury to get users in the door. It was a marketing expense, basically. But it worked. Billions and billions of dollars flowed in.
And as the money flowed in, K1's confidence was, well, let's call it stratospheric.
That's putting it mildly. People who knew him, who interacted with him, described him as having a god complex. He was so combative on Twitter, he'd mock famous economists who were pointing out the, obvious flaws in his system.
He had that famous line, "I don't debate the poor."
I don't debate the poor. That line it tells you everything you need to know about the mindset. It's so dismissive, so arrogant.
And there's this one personal detail that I think it just perfectly illustrates how deep this all went for him. In April 2022, this is right at the absolute peak, when he must have felt totally untouchable, he announces the birth of his daughter.
And he named her Luna.
He named her Luna.
He tweeted, and this is a direct quote, "My dearest creation named after my greatest invention."
Wow. That's putting a lot of weight on a child's name.
It's unbelievable.
It really shows that he didn't see a separation between himself and the project. He was Terra. Terra was him. It wasn't just the business for him. It was his identity, his legacy, and now literally his family.
It was total enmeshment. But while he was celebrating on Twitter and calling his critics poor, the wolves were definitely circling. The regulatory shadows were getting very, very long.
Yeah, let's talk about the SEC because they were not exactly sending him baby gifts.
No. Back in 2021, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission had issued a subpoena. They were looking specifically at that Mirror protocol we mentioned.
The synthetic stocks thing?
Yeah. They want to know if these synthetic stocks were actually unregistered securities. Because, if it looks like a stock and trades like a stock.
The SEC usually thinks it's a stock. So what was K1's reaction? Did he cooperate? Did he hire a big compliance team?
He sued the SEC.
Of course he did. That tracks.
He refused to comply, and he filed a lawsuit against the regulator. It was just pure defiance. He basically argued they didn't have jurisdiction over him because his company was in Singapore, even though he was clearly marketing to U.S. investors.
And it wasn't just the U.S. Things were heating up back in Korea, too.
Right. In late 2021, the Korean National Tax Service came knocking. They told Kwon and his co-founder, Daniel Shin, that they needed to pay about $100 million in taxes.
$100 million? Wow. And let me guess his defense. We aren't a Korean company.
Bingo. They claimed their entities were registered in Singapore and the British Virgin Islands, so they didn't owe Korean taxes.
Yeah.
But the tax authorities said, look, you made all the key management decisions while you were sitting in an office in Seoul. You lived here. You worked here. Pay up.
And then there's this little detail, this piece of paperwork that looks incredibly suspicious in hindsight. Just days before the crash. We're talking late April 2022. Kwon files something in Korea.
This is one of those potential smoking guns. He filed to dissolve the company's main Korean entity. The dissolution was officially approved on May 4th. The crash started on May 7th.
That timing it's just too perfect to be a coincidence.
It's far too coincidental. It raises this massive question. Was it foresight? Did he see the writing on the wall? Did he look at the numbers, see the liquidity in the anchor protocol drying up, and decide to, pull the plug on the legal entity before the market pulled the plug on his currency?
So we're in early May 2022. He's dissolved the Korean company. He's actively fighting the SEC. He's got a new baby named after his greatest invention. And then the week of horror begins.
It all started on May 7th. It began with some very large trades on crypto exchanges, particularly Binance and Curve. A few prominent investors, or whales, sold over $285 million worth of UST in a really short window of time.
That's a huge amount of sell pressure. That's not just regular market activity. That's somebody with a lot of money sprinting for the exit.
It was. And the algorithm, that little robot on the seesaw, it just couldn't handle the weight. The peg broke.
Yeah.
UST dipped to 98.5 cents on May 8th.
Now, to a normal person, 98.5 cents doesn't sound like a disaster. But for a stablecoin?
It's a death knell. It's the whole point. It's supposed to be $1. The promise is broken.
Because if it can be 98 cents, it can be 90 cents. And if it can be 90 cents, then why would you hold it at all?
Exactly. And that's when the panic, the real bank run starts. The Luna Foundation Guard, or LFG, which was this reserve fund they'd set up mostly with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
They tried to save it.
They stepped in.
They loaned out $1.5 billion of their reserves to try and buy up UST and defend the peg. They were literally burning through billions of dollars in Bitcoin to fight the market tide.
But the market won.
The market almost always wins in these scenarios, especially when the fundamentals are broken. UST just plunged. It went to 50 cents, then 30, then 10 cents. And Luna, the coin that was supposed to absorb all this volatility.
It did its job, I guess.
It did exactly what it was programmed to do. It started printing more and more of itself to try and buy back the failing UST.
This is the death spiral, the hyperinflation loop.
Yes. The supply of Luna went from something like 350 million tokens to literally trillions of tokens in a matter of days. It just diluted its own value into oblivion. It went from a peak of $119 down to, well, virtually zero.
Virtually zero. I mean, we're talking about decimal points with a whole lot of zeros after them.
The impact was just catastrophic.
You're right.
It had hundreds of billions of dollars in value wiped out across the entire crypto market because of the contagion. And in South Korea alone, an estimated 200,000 investors were harmed. People lost their retirement funds, their down payments for homes, their kids' college tuition. Everything.
And it was just numbers on a screen. I read this absolutely wild story about a guy who actually went to Kwon's apartment building.
Yes, this happened right in the middle of the chaos. Investor who claimed he'd lost about $2 million. He actually trespassed into Kwon's high-rise condominium in Seoul.
He got into the building.
He got in, went to the apartment, and rang the doorbell. Kwon wasn't there at the time, but his wife was.
Can you even imagine opening the door to that?
He just wanted to talk to him. He demanded an apology. Kwon's wife had to call the police and request emergency protection. It just shows how personal this was. People felt betrayed, not just by a market, but by a person who had promised them safety and financial freedom.
And what was Kwon doing? I mean, in June, just a month later, he tries to pivot again. He actually launches Luna 2.0.
It's unbelievable.
He rebrands the old crash coins as Terra Classic USD and LUNC, and then just tries to start fresh with a whole new blockchain.
It's like the captain of the Titanic surfacing in a lifeboat and immediately trying to sell tickets for the Titanic too.
While the first one is still visibly sinking right behind him.
He was so audacious. And the market reaction was, about what you'd expect, just immediate pushback. People were basically telling him to read the room. But by then, honestly, Kwon had much bigger problems than a failed product launch. The law was coming for him.
And that kicks off the next part of our story, the global manhunt. Because Do Kwon did not stick around in Seoul to face the music.
Not a chance. By June of 2022, prosecutors in South Korea were already looking to invalidate his passport. In September, they issued a formal arrest warrant. Interpol then issued a red notice.
And a red notice is, for all intents and purposes, an international arrest warrant.
It's the closest thing we have. It basically tells police forces in every member country around the world, if you see this man, detain him.
So he's a global fugitive. Was he hiding in a bunker somewhere, keeping a super low profile?
He went on a podcast.
You're kidding me? Unbelievable.
In October 2022, while he's one of the most wanted men in the world, he does this audio interview.
Yeah.
And the host, asks him about his passport being invalidated. And K1 says, and this is almost a direct quote, "I'm not using it anyway. I can't see how that makes a difference."
The arrogance is just, it's off the charts. Oh, that official government document that lets me travel, don't need it.
He refused to say where he was, of course. He claimed it was for his own safety because of threats, like that guy who showed up at his apartment. But in reality, he was treating an Interpol red notice like it was a parking ticket he could just ignore.
But the authorities weren't just listening to podcasts. They were following the breadcrumbs, the digital footprints.
They were. They tracked his movements. He had been based in Singapore. He left there, apparently tried to go to Dubai, but ultimately ended up in Serbia.
Where's Serbia? Why Serbia?
So South Korean authorities pinpointed him there in December 2022. And the reason is strategic. Serbia has no extradition treaty with South Korea.
Ah, safe haven.
It was a calculated move. He wasn't just hiding there. He was trying to establish a life. He even set up a company in Serbia to try and get residency. He was digging in for the long haul.
So he's in Serbia thinking he's safe, but I guess he couldn't stay put forever. Maybe he got restless, or maybe he felt the walls closing in even there.
And this is where the story pivots again to Montenegro. It's March 23, 2023. Podgorica Airport. Kwon is with his CFO, and they're attempting to fly to Dubai on a private jet.
This is the big escape.
The final getaway. He gets to passport control, and he hands the officer a Costa Rican passport.
A fake one.
A very well-falsified one, apparently, but still fake. And it just wasn't his lucky day. The authorities in Montenegro had been tipped off, and they flagged it. They searched his luggage and found another set of fake documents, this time Belgian travel documents.
So let's just pause for a second and appreciate the irony here. The man who built a $40 billion digital empire on a decentralized blockchain,
Who wanted to reinvent money itself.
gets taken down by a fake piece of paper, a physical passport.
It really is the Al Capone tax evasion moment, isn't it? We couldn't catch him on the blockchain, but they caught him at the customs desk. He was arrested right there on the spot. And the dominoes started to fall immediately. The very same day he was arrested in Montenegro, he was indicted by a federal grand jury in the U.S.
So now he's in custody. He's in a cell in Montenegro. And you'd think, okay, the game is over. But this next part of the story shows that even from behind bars, Do Kwon was.
Yeah.
Let's just say he was still active. This part really blew my mind.
This part is just mind-boggling. Reports came out from prosecutors that even after being arrested and put in a detention center in Montenegro, Kwon had managed to withdraw approximately $35 million worth of crypto assets.
Wait, how is that even possible? He's in jail. They take your phone. They take your laptop. How are you moving $35 million?
It just speaks to the nature of crypto, right?
Yeah.
If you have your private keys, that long string of numbers and letters, if you have it memorized or written on a scrap of paper, or if you have an accomplice on the outside with the keys, physical prison walls don't matter to the blockchain.
It also suggests he had prepared for this. I remember reading that before the collapse, he'd sent $7 million to a top Korean law firm, Kim & Chang.
Right. It's like he was prepaying for his legal defense.
A legal defense fund set up before the crime had even been fully prosecuted.
He was building a war chest. He had to have known this day was coming, and he wanted to make sure he had the best lawyers that money could possibly buy.
And then, just to make this whole situation even more complicated and bizarre, we get the Spodzic letter scandal. This is where the story turns from a financial crime into, like, a political thriller.
Right. So in June 2023, a laptop is confiscated from K1 while he's in detention. And on it, authorities find a letter. The contents of this letter suggested, allegedly, that Cohen had financially backed a man named Miloško Spodzic.
And Spodzic is not just some random guy. He's a very big deal in Montenegro.
He was a prominent politician, a candidate for prime minister at the time. The explosive allegation was that Do Kwon had secretly funded Spodic's election campaign.
So now you have this international fugitive, the crypto king, potentially interfering in the national elections of a Balkan nation.
That was the fear. I mean, was he trying to buy protection? Was he trying to buy a new passport, a real one this time? Now, for the record, both K1 and Spodzic vehemently denied all of this, but it turned his detention into a political hot potato. It wasn't just about a fraudster anymore. It was about the integrity of the Montenegrin government.
And all the while, he's still got to deal with the original charge that got him caught, the fake passport.
Right. He actually pleaded not guilty to forgery, which is a bold move, considering he was caught with the documents in his hand at the airport.
A little hard to argue that one.
Yeah, the Montenegrin court didn't buy it. He was sentenced to 4 months in prison just for the fake passports. He appealed, he lost, and he had to serve that time.
But everyone knew those 4 months were just the appetizer. The real main course was extradition. Which brings us to the great tug-of-war.
And this was a legal roller coaster that went on for more than a year, from 2023 all the way to the end of 2024. You had two heavyweights in the ring, both wanting a piece of him.
You had South Korea and you had the United States.
South Korea wanted him for violations of their capital markets law. And their argument was strong. You know, he's our citizen, the company was effectively run from here, and the vast majority of the victims were our people. Let us try him.
Makes sense. But the USA wanted him too.
The U.S. wanted him on 8 counts. Securities fraud, wire fraud, commodities fraud, a whole menu of charges. And let's be honest, when it comes to major financial crimes, especially crypto crimes that touch U.S. investors, the U.S. Department of Justice is extremely aggressive.
And usually the U.S. gets what it wants in these situations, but this was not a straight line.
No, the Montenegrin courts just played ping pong with him. It was dizzying. In November 2023, his extradition was approved, but they didn't say where he was going.
So cliffhanger.
Then in March 2024, an appeals court overturns the decision to send him to the U.S. Then in August, the Supreme Court postpones his extradition to Korea.
It just sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare. It feels like a delay tactic.
It absolutely was. Then in October 2024, the Constitutional Court suspends the extradition again. It really seemed like he might get stuck in the Balkans forever, just filing appeals and living in this legal limbo.
But then December 2024, the final act.
The Justice Minister of Montenegro, a man named Bojan Božović, finally stepped in to make the call. In these cases, when the courts basically say both extradition requests are legally valid, the final decision falls to the political branch.
And he had to choose.
He had to choose. He said he looked at the preponderance of legal criteria, basically weighing the severity of the alleged crimes and the international treaties, and he pointed to the United States.
Game over for the delay tactics.
That was it. On December 31st, 2024, New Year's Eve, of all days to Audi, Kwon was put on a plane and extradited to the U.S. He got to ring in the new year in federal custody.
Which brings us to the finale, the verdict. The year's 2025. Kwon is on U.S. soil. The end is near.
Now, we have to remember, while all of this extradition drama was playing out in Europe, the civil courts in the U.S. hadn't been sleeping. They were moving forward. And in April 2024, a U.S. jury had already found Kwon and Terraform Labs liable for civil fraud.
And there was a key finding in that civil trial that it completely destroys the defense that, oh, it was just a failed algorithm, an honest mistake. This is the Chai story.
The Chai app. This is so crucial to understanding the deception.
Right. So tell us about Chai, because this is what really shifts the whole narrative from incompetence to outright malice.
So Chai was a very popular mobile payment app in Korea. And Kwon's big claim, his big selling point for Terra, was that the Chai app was using the Terra blockchain to settle its transactions in the background.
He used this to prove that Terra had real-world utility, that it wasn't just for speculation. People were buying coffee and groceries on his blockchain right now. He would even show charts of the transaction volume.
But were they?
They were not. The jury found that this was a complete fabrication, a lie. Chai was using traditional banking rails, standard payment processing, just like any other app.
So what were the transactions on the blockchain? Where did that data come from?
This is the genius and the deception of it. Kwon had his engineers create a mirror server. It would essentially watch the real-world purchases happening on Chai, and then it would create fake corresponding transactions on the Terra blockchain to match them.
So if I bought a coffee for $3 using the Chai app.
The app would process it normally through a bank, but then Kwon's secret server would ping the blockchain and create a record that says, look, a $3 coffee transaction just happened.
It was digital theater. It was a prop. He was manufacturing transaction volume to pump up the value of Luna and to sell this story of mass adoption to investors. That's not a failed experiment. That's just lying.
So when he finally lands in the U.S. for his criminal trial in 2025, the writing is on the wall. He can't just claim he was a dreamer whose math was a little off. He now has to explain the fake server.
It was completely indefensible. And I think his lawyers knew that. In August of 2025, Do Kwon pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud.
He cut a deal.
He did. He agreed to forfeit $19 million. And the sentencing hearing was set for December 11th, 2025.
The moment of truth. The U.S. government, as part of the deal, had argued for a sentence of no more than 12 years.
Which is still a very substantial amount of time in federal prison.
But the judge went further. The final sentence was 15 years in prison.
15 years. He'll be nearly 50 years old when he gets out.
It's a heavy sentence. Now, you compare that to, say, Sam Bankman-Fried's 25 years for the FTX collapse. Kwon got less, and that's partly because he pleaded guilty and perhaps because the mechanics of the fraud were seen as slightly different. But it sends an incredibly clear message.
The message is, you cannot engineer this kind of financial destruction from a laptop, go on the run, hide out in Serbia, and expect to just walk away from it. The arm of the law is long.
So here we are. The dust has finally settled. Kwon is in a cell. The $45 billion is gone forever. When you step back and look at this whole saga, what does it all mean?
You know, when I look at this story, I really see a tragedy of intellect. Kwon was clearly brilliant. Stanford, Apple, Microsoft, he could have broke anything. He could have built a legitimate, world-changing fintech unicorn.
But he had that complex, that God complex. He didn't want to build a company. He wanted to be the central banker of the entire internet.
And he forgot, or maybe he never believed, that stability isn't something you can just code into existence if the underlying economics are based on, well, on nothing but belief.
It relied on belief, and it relied on his cult of personality. And the second that belief shattered, the math shattered with it. And it wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was real savings, real retirements, real panic.
And here's a thought I want to leave everyone with, our final provocative thought. Kwon created a system that was supposed to be the epitome of decentralized. That was the big promise of crypto, right? No kings, no masters, no central points of failure.
And yet, this entire $45 billion ecosystem collapsed almost entirely because of the hubris and the lies of one single man.
Even after that man was arrested, he was still moving millions of dollars from a jail cell. He was still potentially influencing national elections. The market was still hanging on his every word.
It really makes you wonder, in this new decentralized world we keep hearing about, how much power does one charismatic, brilliant, and deeply flawed individual actually hold?
It seems like even when the handcuffs are on, the answer is still way too much. Maybe we haven't gotten rid of the kings, we've just replaced the regulated ones with much more volatile ones.
Exactly. So the next time you see a genius founder with a golden resume and a sure-thing investment that seems too good to be true,
maybe check to see if they failed their first government evaluation.
remember NE5? Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.